Dr. Marcus Rodriguez was having what he generously called a Tuesday, which meant someone somewhere in the galaxy was probably dying in a spectacularly stupid way, and somehow it would become his problem. He sat in the cramped medical bay of the interspecies vessel Hippocratic Oaths, staring at a cup of coffee that had achieved the remarkable feat of being both scalding hot and utterly flavorless. The wonders of space travel, ladies and gentlemen. Mac! Captain Vextar's voice crackled through the comm system, with that particular tone that meant Mac's day was about to get significantly worse. Emergency transmission coming in. Priority Alpha. Mac didn't move from his chair. Priority Alpha meant someone important was dying, which was different from the usual Tuesday situation where someone unimportant was dying. The galaxy had a very strict hierarchy about these things. Let me guess, Mac called back, taking another sip of his liquid disappointment. Someone with more money than sense tried to pet something with more teeth than patience, and now they need the scary human doctor to fix their mistake. Close, Vextar said, his reptilian voice carrying that dry humor that had made him Max's favorite captain in the past 3 years. It's Pack Leader Grimjaw of the Fenric Confederation. Mac nearly choked on his coffee. The Fenric were 8 feet of pure predatory muscle, wrapped in fur and bad attitudes. They were the kind of species that considered diplomatic negotiation to be deciding which end of you to start eating first. They had never, in the recorded history of the galaxy, asked for help from anyone, ever. I'm sorry, Mac said, setting down his cup carefully. Did you just say that the leader of the galaxy's most notorious pack of murder wolves wants our help? The same Fenric who think the appropriate response to a stubbed toe is ritual combat to the death? The very same, Vextar confirmed. And Mac? He's not asking for help, he's begging. That got Mac's attention. Fenric didn't beg. Fenric didn't even say please. The closest they got to polite was not immediately ripping your throat out when you disagreed with them. The view screen in the medical bay flickered to life, and Mac found himself staring at Pack Leader Grimjaw himself. If you took a wolf, scaled it up to the size of a small truck, gave it opposable thumbs in a really bad day, you'd have something approaching a Fenric. Grimjaw was particularly impressive, with scars that told the story of a life spent settling disagreements through creative violence, and teeth that could probably bite through titanium plating. Right now, those teeth were chattering with barely controlled emotion. Human doctor, Grimjaw growled, his voice like distant thunder. My cubs are dying. Mac blinked. In all his years of interspecies medicine, he'd learned to read between the lines. When a Fenric warrior said his cubs were dying, he wasn't being dramatic. Fenric didn't do drama. They did facts, usually delivered with a side of dismemberment. All right, Mac said, leaning forward. What are we looking at here? Plague? Poison? Did someone feed them something stupid? Grimjaw's ears flattened against his skull. Our healers cannot determine the cause. The cubs grow weak, their fur loses its color in patches, and they refuse to eat. 43 have already. He paused, and Mac realized with a start that the terrifying pack leader was fighting back tears. 200 more show symptoms. Mac felt that familiar tightening in his chest that meant he was about to do something professionally stupid and personally necessary. 200 sick kids, even if they were kids who would grow up to be apex predators, with a fondness for solving problems through creative violence. What have your healers tried? Mac asked. Everything, Grimjaw said, his pride warring with his desperation. Bioregenerative therapy, quantum healing chambers, cellular reconstruction matrices. Our medical technology is centuries ahead of yours, human. We have tried everything our science can offer. Mac nodded thoughtfully. And it's not working. Now, so you called the primitive human with his archaic medical knowledge and his barbaric tendency to actually touch his patients. Grimjaw's yellow eyes flashed, but he nodded slowly. Yes? Mac stood up, already mentally cataloging what he'd need to pack. Captain Vextar, set course for Fenric Prime. Maximum burn. Mac? Vextar's voice came through the comm with a warning tone. The Fenric homeworld is challenging for humans. The gravity is twice Earth standard. The atmosphere has a sulfur content that will make your eyes water constantly, and the locals consider eating visiting doctors to be a traditional welcome ceremony. Fantastic, Mac muttered, pulling on his jacket. Just another day at the office. On the screen, Grimjaw watched him with something that might have been hope. You will come. Mac looked at the pack leader, this creature who could tear him apart without breaking a sweat, reduced to begging a human for help. Pack leader, I've spent the last 15 years keeping this galaxy's various species from dying of their own stupidity. I'm not about to stop now just because your people have a habit of using intestines as party decorations. For the first time since the call began, Grimjaw's expression shifted. It might have been relief, or it might have been the beginning of a smile. With Fenric, it was sometimes hard to tell the difference. "Prepare your people, pack leader," Max said, checking his medical bag. "The scary human doctor is making a house call." The first thing Mac noticed about Fenric Prime was that it looked exactly like the kind of planet where evolution had given up on subtlety and gone straight for maximum intimidation factor. Volcanic peaks jabbed into a perpetually stormy sky like angry fingers, while the landscape below looked like it had been designed by someone who really, really hated the concept of pleasant weather. The second thing he noticed was the welcoming committee. 12 Fenric warriors stood in formation around the landing pad, each one roughly the size and disposition of an irritated grizzly bear who had been hitting the gym. Their idea of dress uniforms apparently involved more spikes than a medieval torture chamber, and enough leather to upholster a small spacecraft. "Well," Mac muttered to himself as the shuttle's ramp lowered, "at least they're not immediately trying to eat me. That's progress." The gravity hit him like a truck made of lead. Mac had prepared for it, but knowing something intellectually and having your skeleton try to compress itself into a diamond were two very different experiences. He managed to walk down the ramp without face-planting, which he considered a minor victory. Pack leader Grimjaw stepped forward, and Mac got his first good look at the Fenric leader in person. The hologram hadn't done justice to just how impressively terrifying he was. Grimjaw stood easily 8.5 feet tall, with shoulders that could have been used as a landing platform for small aircraft. His fur was a deep black shot through with silver, and his yellow eyes held the kind of intelligence that made Mac remember why Fenric were apex predators on a planet where everything else was also trying to kill you. "Human doctor," Grimjaw grumbled, his voice carrying easily over the constant wind. "You came." "Well, I was in the neighborhood," Mac said, hefting his medical bag. "Plus, I hear you folks throw great dinner parties, assuming I'm not the main course." Several of the warriors shifted uncomfortably at that. Mac had learned that Fenric respected directness, even when it involved acknowledging that they could turn you into a light snack without breaking stride. Grimjaw's ears twitched, which Mac had learned was the Fenric equivalent of a nervous laugh. "The cubs are in the healing chambers. Our medical staff awaits your consultation." The way he said consultation made it clear that this was probably the most diplomatically painful sentence Grimjaw had ever uttered. Mac almost felt sorry for him. Almost. They walked through the Fenric settlement, which looked like someone had taken a normal city and decided it needed more teeth and fire. Buildings were carved directly into volcanic rock, with architectural choices that heavily favored imposing fortress over homey cottage. Everything was built to scale for 8-foot predators, which made Mac feel like he was touring a particularly aggressive theme park. "So," Mac said, partly to break the awkward silence and partly because he was genuinely curious, "what exactly have your healers tried? And please tell me it was more sophisticated than howling at the moon until the problem went away." Grimjaw's tail lashed once, a sign of irritation. "Our healers are highly trained, human. They have undergone decades of study in the most advanced medical facilities in the galaxy." "I'm sure they have," Max said. "I'm just wondering what their approach has been." "Full cellular analysis using quantum bioscanners," one of the warriors behind them volunteered. "Molecular reconstruction therapy, genetic realignment protocols, and temporal healing matrices." Mac nodded slowly. "Right. And the traditional methods?" Grimjaw looked confused. "Traditional methods?" "You know, the stuff your people did before they had all the fancy gadgets. Herbal remedies, dietary changes, basic physical examination." The pack leader's expression suggested that Mac had just asked him to explain the mating habits of interdimensional butterflies. "Those methods are primitive, outdated. We have evolved beyond such crude practices." "Ah," Mac said, "I see." They reached the healing center, which was less medical facility and more technological cathedral. The building soared upward in sweeping curves of polished metal and crystal, with soft lighting that probably cost more than Mac's annual salary. It was beautiful, impressive, and absolutely screaming, "Look how advanced we are." Mac was already starting to get a very bad feeling about this. "The cubs are in the primary treatment wing," Grimjaw said, leading him through corridors lined with medical equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie with a really good special effects budget. "Our head healer, Wisefang, will brief you on the situation." "Wisefang?" Mac asked. She has studied at the Galactic Medical Institute for 47 years, Grimjaw said with obvious pride. Her knowledge of advanced bioregenerative theory is unmatched. Mac was starting to understand why 200 Fenric cubs were sick and getting worse, despite having access to medical technology that made human hospitals look like cave paintings. Sometimes the problem wasn't that you didn't know enough. Sometimes the problem was that you knew too much and had forgotten how to use your eyes. Wisefang turned out to be a lean, silver-furred Fenric whose eyes held the particular brand of intellectual arrogance that Mac had learned to recognize in doctors who had forgotten that medicine was supposed to be about helping people, not showing off how smart you were. She stood surrounded by more medical equipment than most human hospitals had in their entire facility, all of it humming and beeping and displaying readouts that probably required advanced degrees in theoretical physics to understand. "Ah," she said, looking Mac up and down like he was a particularly disappointing lab specimen. "The human practitioner. I have reviewed your species' medical literature. Quite quaint." Mac set his medical bag down on a nearby table, which immediately caused several Fenric healers to step back as if he'd placed a live grenade there. "Thank you. That's the nicest way anyone's ever called my entire profession primitive." "We appreciate your willingness to assist," Wisefang continued, "though I confess I am uncertain what you can offer that our quantum diagnostic arrays cannot." "Well," Max said, "let's start with seeing the patients. That's usually step one in most medical traditions, even the quaint ones." Wisefang's ears flattened slightly. "Of course. Though I should mention that we have already conducted extensive bioscans of all affected cubs. The data is quite comprehensive." She led him to a viewing wall that looked into the treatment ward. Mac's heart sank. 20 small Fenric cubs lay in what looked like futuristic hospital beds, each one surrounded by enough monitoring equipment to launch a space shuttle. The cubs were clearly sick. Their normally vibrant fur appeared dull and patchy, with strange blue-gray spots scattered across their small bodies. They lay listlessly, barely responding to the concerned adult Fenric who moved between the beds. "Poor little guys," Mac murmured, then looked at Wisefang. "Can I go in and examine them?" The silence that followed was so profound that Mac could hear the volcanic wind outside the building. "Examine them?" Wisefang repeated, as if Mac had suggested performing brain surgery with a soup ladle. "You know," Mac said, miming the actions. "Look at them with my eyes, touch them with my hands, maybe listen to their hearts and lungs, old-fashioned stuff." "But we have full biometric readings," another healer protested, gesturing to a wall of displays that looked like the control center for a small city. "Cellular composition, genetic markers, quantum field fluctuations, temporal displacement analysis." Mac stared at the displays. "Right. And what do all these readings tell you is wrong with them?" Wisefang drew herself up proudly. "Based on our comprehensive analysis, we have determined that the cubs are suffering from quantum cellular destabilization syndrome, likely triggered by exposure to negative bioresonance fields emanating from disrupted planetary ley lines." Mac blinked slowly. "I'm sorry, could you run that by me again, in words that don't sound like you're casting a magic spell?" "The planetary energy grid has been disturbed," Wisefang explained patiently as if speaking to a child. "This has created harmonic imbalances in the cub's bioquantum matrix, resulting in cellular dysfunction and metabolic cascade failure." "Uh-huh," Mac said. "And your treatment?" "We are attempting to recalibrate their quantum signatures, using harmonic resonance therapy while simultaneously reconstructing their cellular matrices at the molecular level." Mac looked at the cubs, then at the wall of incomprehensible technology, then back at Wisefang. "How long have you been trying this approach?" 14 days. "And how are the cubs responding?" Wisefang's confident expression faltered slightly. "The treatment has not yet achieved optimal effectiveness." "They're getting worse," Mac translated. "The condition is proving resistant to conventional quantum medical intervention." Mac walked closer to the viewing window, studying the cubs with his primitive human eyes. They were lethargic. Their fur was losing pigmentation in patches, and several appeared to be having difficulty keeping food down. He'd seen similar symptoms before, though admittedly in human patients. "Can I ask you something?" Mac said. "When did this start?" "Approximately 3 weeks ago," Wisefang replied. "The first cases appeared suddenly, with no apparent trigger event." "And was anything different about that time? Any changes in routine, environment, diet?" Wisefang waved dismissively. "We conducted full environmental scans. No anomalies detected. no changes in atmospheric composition, electromagnetic fields, or quantum flux patterns. What about their food? The cubs receive optimal nutrition through our advanced dietary program, another healer chimed in proudly. Scientifically formulated, to provide perfect macro and micronutrient balance. Mac felt a familiar tingle in his brain, the same feeling he got when he was about to make a connection that everyone else had missed. This advanced dietary program, is it new? We implemented it 4 weeks ago, Wisefang said. It replaced the primitive practice of feeding cubs actual prey, much more efficient and hygienic. Mac closed his eyes and counted to 5. When he opened them, he found every Fenric in the room staring at him expectantly. Let me get this straight, he said slowly. 4 weeks ago, you changed the cubs' diet from whatever they were eating before to some kind of processed food substitute? Scientifically optimized nutritional matrices, Wisefang corrected. 3 weeks ago, the cubs started getting sick. Yes, but our analysis clearly shows, and instead of thinking maybe, just maybe, there might be a connection between changing their food and them getting sick, you decided it was caused by, what did you call it? Planetary energy grid disruption? Wisefang's tail began to twitch in agitation. Human doctor, your primitive medical training may not have covered quantum bioresonance theory, but I assure you that correlation does not imply— Can I see one of the cubs? Mac interrupted. Just for a few minutes. I promise I won't contaminate them with my primitive human germs. Grimjaw, who had been listening from the back of the room, stepped forward. Allow it. But pack leader, Wisefang protested. The sterile field protocols. Allow it, Grimjaw repeated, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had made him leader of a species that considered disagreement a form of combat sport. Mac pulled on a pair of gloves from his medical bag. Simple latex gloves that probably cost less than a single sensor on the Fenric monitoring equipment. The healers watched in horror as he approached one of the cubs, a small female who couldn't have been more than a few months old. Hey there, sweetheart, Mac said softly, gently placing his hand on the cub's head. She opened yellow eyes that were far too dull for a healthy Fenric youngling. Mac felt her nose, dry and warm. He checked her gums, pale. He listened to her heartbeat with his ancient stethoscope, while the Fenric healers watched in fascination. Then, he did something that made Wisefang gasp in horror. He picked up the cub and held her against his chest, feeling how light she was, how her small body trembled with weakness. You poor little thing, he murmured. Nobody's been taking proper care of you, have they? That's when Mac noticed something the quantum bioscanners had missed. The cub's breath smelled wrong. Not sick wrong, but nutritionally wrong. It was a subtle scent that no machine would ever detect, but that any doctor who had actually spent time with patients would recognize immediately. Wisefang, Mac said, still holding the cub, what exactly is in your scientifically optimized food? Processed protein matrices, carbohydrate complexes, essential vitamins and mineral supplements, she recited proudly. And what did they eat before? Raw prey. Mostly scalix, small herbivores native to our world. Highly inefficient from a nutritional standpoint. Mac felt puzzle pieces clicking into place in his mind. These scalix, what do they eat? Volcanic moss and mineral-rich plants that grow near the thermal vents. Mac smiled grimly. Mineral-rich plants. Yes, but we supplement with all necessary minerals in the processed food. All the minerals you know about, Mac corrected. Tell me, Wisefang, in your 47 years of advanced medical training, did anyone ever teach you that sometimes the most sophisticated diagnostic equipment in the galaxy can't replace actually looking at your patient and asking the simple questions? The room fell silent except for the humming of expensive medical equipment that had completely missed the obvious answer to a problem that could have been solved in 5 minutes by any doctor who remembered that medicine was about healing, not impressing colleagues with complicated diagnoses. Mac gently set the cub back down and turned to face the assembled healers. Your cubs don't have quantum cellular destabilization syndrome, he said. They have a nutritional deficiency. Specifically, they're missing trace minerals that they used to get from eating prey that fed on mineral-rich plants. It's causing anemia, weakness, and disrupted cellular metabolism, which would look an awful lot like cellular dysfunction if you were determined to find something complicated in quantum. Wisefang's mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound. The cure, Mac continued, is not quantum harmonic recalibration therapy. It's giving them the missing minerals. Basic supplements that probably cost less than running your diagnostic arrays for an hour. Grimjaw stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Are you certain? Mac looked at the pack leader, then at the sick cubs, then at the wall of expensive equipment that had been completely useless for solving a simple nutritional problem. Pack leader, he said. I'm human. We're supposedly the most primitive species in the galaxy. We use stethoscopes made of metal and rubber. We rely on our senses instead of quantum scanners, and we still think touching our patients is an important part of medicine. But you know what we're really good at? What? We're good at keeping our kids alive. The silence in the medical center stretched on until Max started to wonder if he'd accidentally insulted their ancestors, their gods, or their favorite brand of ceremonial combat armor. Finally, Wisefang found her voice. You are suggesting, she said, her words careful and precise, that our quantum diagnostic arrays, our molecular analysis systems, and our bioresonance scanners all failed to detect a simple mineral deficiency? I'm not suggesting it, Max said, pulling a small bottle from his medical bag. I'm telling you, your cubs need iron, zinc, and about 6 other trace elements that they used to get from eating things that ate mineral-rich plants. It's not quantum, it's not mystical, it's basic nutrition. He held up the bottle, which contained what looked like ordinary vitamin supplements. Several Fenric healers actually took a step backward. These are human nutritional supplements, Mac continued. They cost about 5 credits for a bottle of 100. Your quantum harmonic recalibration therapy probably costs more per minute than I spend on medical supplies in a month. But the readings, another healer protested weakly. The cellular degradation patterns, the biofield disruptions, are exactly what you'd expect to see when kids aren't getting proper nutrition, Mac interrupted. Their bodies are trying to function without essential building blocks. Of course their cells look weird on your scans. They're starving at the molecular level. Grimjaw stepped forward, his massive form looming over the assembled healers. Wisefang, could the human be correct? Wisefang's ears flattened against her skull. Pack leader, with respect, this goes against decades of established medical science. We cannot simply abandon proven quantum medical protocols based on the theories of a doctor who actually looked at the patients, Max suggested helpfully. A primitive practitioner using outdated methodologies, Wisefang finished stiffly. Max sighed and turned to Grimjaw. Pack leader, here's what I propose. Give me 1 cub, the sickest one you've got. Let me treat her with my primitive, outdated methodology. If she doesn't show significant improvement within 24 hours, you can go back to recalibrating quantum signatures until the heat death of the universe. And if you are wrong, Wisefang demanded, if your crude interventions harm the cub? Mac looked through the viewing window at the cubs lying motionless in their high-tech beds. Look at them, Wisefang. Really look at them. Your advanced treatment hasn't helped them in 2 weeks. How much worse can they get? That seemed to hit home. Several of the healers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Very well, Grimjaw said. You may attempt your treatment on 1 cub. Which do you choose? Max studied the cubs through the window, then pointed to a small female in the corner bed. She was barely moving, her breathing shallow and rapid. Her. She's the worst off, which means if this works, you'll see results fast. Little Claw, Grimjaw said quietly. She is my daughter. Mac felt the weight of that statement. The pack leader was willing to let the primitive human experiment on his own child. That took either tremendous faith or complete desperation. Probably both. I'll take good care of her, Mac promised, then turned to the healers. I'm going to need you to shut down all the monitoring equipment around her bed. The constant humming and beeping is stressing her out. Shut down the monitors. Wisefang looked like Mac had suggested they set the medical center on fire. How will we track her vital signs, her cellular activity, her quantum field fluctuations? Mac tapped his temple. With these, they're called eyes. I'm also going to use this, he held up his stethoscope, and these, he wiggled his fingers. Revolutionary human technology known as paying attention. 20 minutes later, Max sat beside Little Claw's bed in blissful silence. The army of monitors had been reluctantly powered down, leaving just him, the cub, and a simple IV drip he'd rigged up using supplies from his bag. The other healers watched from outside like he was performing some kind of arcane ritual. Which, from their perspective, he probably was. There we go, sweetheart, Mac murmured, gently stroking Little Claw's fur as the IV delivered a carefully balanced mineral solution into her system. Just some good old-fashioned iron and friends, nothing quantum about it. Little Claw's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. Mac took that as a good sign. "Human doctor," Grimjaw said from the doorway. "May I ask what you are doing now?" "Sitting with her," Mac replied. "Sometimes the best medicine is just making sure someone knows they're not alone." "Is this standard human medical protocol?" Mac chuckled. "Depends on the human, but yeah, we tend to think that healing works better when the patient feels cared for. Crazy concept, I know." Grimjaw entered the room, moving with surprising gentleness for someone who could probably arm wrestle a small building. He settled onto the floor beside Mac, his massive frame making the human look like a child by comparison. "She has not been this peaceful in days," Grimjaw observed. "The monitoring equipment was keeping her agitated," Mac explained. "All that noise and flashing lights? Imagine trying to recover from illness while someone constantly poked and prodded you with machines. Sometimes less is more." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Little Claw's breathing slowly become deeper and more regular. Mac checked her pulse every few minutes, not with quantum scanners or biofield analyzers, but with his fingers against her wrist, the way doctors had been doing it for thousands of years. "Human doctor," Grimjaw said eventually, "may I ask you something?" "Shoot." "Your people are considered primitive by galactic standards. Your technology is centuries behind ours. Your medical knowledge is deemed outdated. Why do you believe your methods will succeed where ours have failed?" Mac considered the question while watching Little Claw's ears twitch in sleep. "Because we never forgot that medicine isn't about the technology, pack leader. It's about the patient. Your healers got so caught up in proving how smart they were that they forgot to ask the simple questions. What changed? What's different? What does the patient actually need? And what do they need?" Mac gestured to the peaceful scene. No machines, no quantum scanners, just a sick child getting basic care and attention. They need someone to actually look at them, touch them, listen to them. They need someone who cares more about making them better than about impressing colleagues with fancy diagnoses. Grimjaw was quiet for a long moment. "You speak as if caring were a medical technique." "Pack leader," Mac said. "In human medicine, caring is the technique. Everything else is just tools to help us care better." That's when Little Claw opened her eyes and looked directly at Mac. Her gaze was clearer than it had been in days, and when she saw her father, her tail managed a weak wag. "Hello there, brave girl," Mac said softly. "Feeling a little better?" Little Claw made a small sound, not quite a growl, not quite a purr, but definitely a response. Outside the room, Mac heard Wisefang's sharp intake of breath. "She has not responded to stimulus in 48 hours, she whispered. Mac checked his watch. "It's been 6 hours since I started the mineral drip. Give it another 18 hours, and she'll be ready to wrestle her old man." Grimjaw's expression was unreadable, but Mac caught the slight tremor in the massive Fenric's voice when he spoke. "You truly believe she will recover?" Mac looked at Little Claw, who was now trying to lift her head to get a better look at the strange human who smelled like antiseptic and hope. "Pack leader," he said, "I don't believe it, I know it, because sometimes the most advanced medicine in the galaxy is just giving someone what they actually need and making sure they know someone cares whether they get better." From outside the room came the sound of Wisefang frantically recalibrating her quantum diagnostic arrays, trying to understand how a bottle of 5-credit supplements was accomplishing what her million-credit equipment couldn't. Mac just smiled and kept stroking Little Claw's fur as her breathing continued to strengthen. 18 hours later, Little Claw was sitting up in bed, demanding food in the universal language of hungry children everywhere, which, in her case, involved tiny growls and attempts to nibble on Mac's fingers. "Well," Mac said, gently extracting his hand from her surprisingly sharp teeth, "I think it's safe to say the treatment worked." Wisefang stood in the doorway, staring at her quantum diagnostic readouts with the expression of someone whose entire worldview had just been demolished by a 5-credit bottle of vitamins. "The bio-readings are normal, completely normal. How is this possible?" "Because," Mac said, offering Little Claw a piece of properly mineral-rich food he'd improvised from local ingredients, "sometimes the answer isn't complicated. Sometimes kids just need the right nutrition and someone who gives a damn." Word spread through the Fenric settlement like wildfire. Within hours, Mac found himself surrounded by 200 cubs receiving simple IV mineral supplements instead of quantum harmonic recalibration therapy. The results were exactly what anyone with basic medical training would have predicted. Rapid, dramatic improvement across the board. Grimjaw watched his daughter playfully wrestling with 3 other cubs who had recovered enough to cause trouble. and Mac could have sworn he saw tears in the pack leader's eyes. "Human doctor," Grimjaw said, "I owe you a debt that cannot be repaid." "Actually, you don't," Mac replied, packing up his medical bag, "because this is what doctors do. We help kids get better. It's not a favor, it's just the job." "But surely, there must be something." "There is one thing," Mac interrupted. "Start teaching your healers to actually examine their patients. Touch them, talk to them, listen to what their bodies are telling you, instead of what your machines are telling you." Wisefang approached hesitantly, looking like she'd aged a decade in the past day. "Human doctor, I must ask, how did you know, how did you see what our advanced systems could not?" Mac considered the question while watching Little Claw attempt to climb her father's massive arm. "Because I looked at the timeline, asked simple questions, and remembered that the most likely explanation is usually the right one. You changed their diet, they got sick. Connect the dots. But our education, our training, taught you to look for complex answers to simple problems," Mac finished. "Sometimes a cough is just a cough. Sometimes sick kids just need better food and someone who cares." He turned to address the group of healers who had gathered around. "Your technology is impressive. Your knowledge is vast. But you forgot the most important thing. Medicine is about healing, not showing off how smart you are." "And human medicine remembers this?" another healer asked. Mac smiled grimly. "Human medicine grew up on a planet where everything was trying to kill us. We didn't have the luxury of overthinking things. If someone was dying, we figured out why and fixed it. Fast. Because caring about keeping people alive was the only way we survived." Grimjaw placed a massive paw gently on Mac's shoulder. "You have saved not just my daughter but our future. How do humans learn such wisdom?" Mac watched Little Claw successfully tackle one of her playmates, and wondered how to explain that human medicine was born from desperation, refined through necessity, and powered by the simple fact that humans were stubborn enough to refuse to let each other die. "We learned it the hard way," he said finally, "by making mistakes, losing people we cared about, and deciding that we'd rather be simple and effective than sophisticated and useless." As if summoned by the conversation, Mac's communicator chimed with an incoming message. He glanced at it and couldn't help but laugh. "What is it?" Grimjaw asked. "3 more species want consultations," Mac said, shaking his head. "Apparently word is getting around that the primitive human doctor can solve problems that advanced galactic medicine can't. And will you help them?" Mac looked around at the cubs playing happily in their beds, at the healers frantically taking notes on primitive human diagnostic techniques, and at Grimjaw watching his daughter with the relief of a parent who thought he'd lost everything and got it back. "Pack leader," Mac said, "I'm human, we're too stubborn to know when to quit, too practical to make things more complicated than they need to be, and too caring to let kids stay sick when we can help them." He hefted his simple medical bag with its basic instruments and 5-credit supplements. "Of course I'll help them. It's what we do." 3 months later, Mac stood in the same medical center where he'd first encountered Wisefang's quantum diagnostic arrays. The difference was that now half the equipment had been replaced with simple examination tables, basic monitoring devices, and, revolutionary concept, windows that let in natural light. "The crystalline hegemony reports a 90% recovery rate using your primitive hydration protocols," Grimjaw said, reading from a datapad. "The ethereal collective's younglings are thriving after you taught them that emotional support is actually medicine, not just philosophical weakness." Mac watched through the window as Little Claw, now completely recovered, was teaching a group of younger cubs how to properly tackle their elders. She'd grown considerably in the past 3 months and showed every sign of becoming as formidable as her father. "And the Quantum Medical Institute?" Mac asked. Grimjaw's ears twitched, and what Mac had learned was Fenric amusement. "They have formally requested that you establish a primitive human medical exchange program to teach their students the lost art of actually looking at patients." "Lost art," Mac repeated. "Right." Wisefang approached, carrying what looked suspiciously like Mac's old stethoscope. She'd taken to human medical techniques with the enthusiasm of someone who'd rediscovered that medicine could actually heal people instead of just impressing colleagues. "Human doctor," she said, "the Transport Guild's emergency medical teams want to know if you can teach their healers your barbaric practice of talking to patients to understand their symptoms." Mac couldn't help but grin. "Barbaric, I like that." "There is one more thing," Grimjaw said, his tone becoming serious. "The Galactic Medical Council has officially classified human medical practices as primitive but inexplicably effective, and wants to establish formal research partnerships." Let me guess, Mac said. They want to study why our methods work so they can develop more advanced versions that probably won't work as well. Essentially, yes. Mac looked around the medical center, where Fenric healers were learning to use simple instruments, touch their patients, and ask basic questions like, what changed recently, and how are you feeling? Revolutionary stuff, apparently. Counteroffer, Mac said. We established the exchange program, but on human terms. No quantum this, bioresonance that. Just medicine. Real medicine. The kind that actually helps people. And if they refuse? Mac's communicator chimed with another message, the fifth that day, from various species requesting medical consultations. Apparently, word was spreading that the galaxy's most primitive species had somehow figured out how to keep their people healthy, using nothing more sophisticated than caring, common sense, and the radical idea that sometimes the simplest answer was the right one. Then they can keep their quantum diagnostic arrays, Mac said, and we'll keep saving lives with stethoscopes and vitamins. Little Claw bounded over to the window and pressed her face against the glass, leaving nose prints that would probably horrify the old medical establishment. Mac waved at her, and she responded with what could charitably be called a smile, though it involved far more teeth than most species were comfortable with. You know what the funny thing is? Mac said to Grimjaw. They think we're primitive because we use simple tools and ask basic questions. But the truth is, we're not primitive at all. What are you then? Mac watched Little Claw rejoin her friends, healthy and happy and completely unaware that her recovery had started a medical revolution across 3 star systems. We're practical, he said. We're the species that figured out that the point of medicine isn't to prove how smart you are. It's to make sure everyone gets to go home to their families. His communicator chimed again. Another species, another medical mystery that their advanced technology couldn't solve. Max smiled and headed for the door. After all, he was human, and humans, despite being the galaxy's most primitive species, had somehow become its best doctors, simply by remembering that medicine was supposed to be about healing. It was, Mac reflected, a pretty good day to be primitive.